have a slightly difficult job now because we have to define what this airplane meant for the financial system and what pieces we can salvage from the existent infrastructure. So let me start by saying that what is obvious to everyone, which is that basically we're living in a situation in which technologies are developing exponentially. And this has switched very significantly the landscape of the financial system as a whole. Now, this implies new participants, this implies new technologies, and this implies new functionalities that we have to bring in so that we can basically provide for a society that is immersed in the digital economy. And the big question here, or what we are seeing now, it's a big pressure on traditional financial ecosystems. And the big question is exactly how we define this new world that we want to live in. So basically, what pieces of the existing financial infrastructures and financial institutions we need to keep and preserve for the future functioning of our systems. And I think we all agree that the current system does not work very well. So we have lots of opportunities in terms of providing better services for this digital society. But we need to be careful in terms of which paths we take. So how we choose a new plane to distribute the currency, as the general manager said, is quite a delicate task. And we have to be careful as not to throw away the issuance of bills and currencies together with the plane. And we have to identify those elements that we need to keep and we need to cherish from the existing system. What we will try to do here is we will try to learn from the experiences from my colleagues that have a very deep perspective into the traditional financial infrastructures and just identify how we manage to transition while providing the services that our societies need looking into the future. And for this, I have two of the global leading voices here with me that have pushed a lot the boundary in terms of payments and in terms of financial services within the traditional infrastructures. So we have Tom Zschach. He's the Chief Innovation Officer from SWIFT, and they have been working in lots of products in terms of providing these new services and making SWIFT compatible with the new needs of the economy. And we also have Tony McLaughlin, who has been pushing the boundaries in many aspects from a global perspective from Citi, proposing very interesting new ways of doing payments and doing financial services. Let me start with the questions because we have a lot to say here with my colleagues. So the first one is, there's this dichotomy going on in terms of whether we should eliminate everything, not just the plane, but also the central bank and also the issuance of money and everything, versus keeping everything as is. So there is this dichotomy in terms of whether we can get into a balanced perspective and define exactly what we mean by just switching the plane for a new, more efficient one. So from your practical perspective, I would like for you to share with us what this medium point would look like and which elements are important to keep and whether we can keep these two elements, the existing infrastructure going forward, but also allowing for these new technologies to come in and provide new services. Tony, please.
Yeah, thank you. It's a delight to be here. That dichotomy, I'd like to try to articulate what that dichotomy might be. In the traditional regulated financial system today, we live in what we might call the messaging paradigm. The mental model to construct here is we live in a world with thousands of regulated financial institutions and a couple of hundred central banks, and they are all separate balance sheets and they maintain their own ledgers. And when we're conducting financial transactions today, let's just take a simple payment. What is a payment? A payment is really the transfer of assets and liabilities between two institutions, or more than two institutions in many cases. So at the beginning of a simple payment, my bank owes me $100. At the end of the payment, your bank owes you $100. Now, how have we achieved that? We've achieved that by sending messages between my bank and your bank, and between my bank and the central bank to conduct the settlement. Because your bank will only accept the incremental $100 of liabilities if it receives a matching asset at the central bank. So essentially, in today's paradigm, we're updating three separate balance sheets by messaging. So that's the predominant paradigm that we live in today, is the messaging paradigm. The dichotomy is that when blockchains were invented, it created a different mechanism for value transfer. Because the real difference between blockchains and the traditional financial system is that in the blockchains, the value is in the network. And in today's world, there's no value in the messaging network. There's no value in SWIFT. There's no value in Visa or in MasterCard or in the messaging systems. So when people talk about the potential of tokenization, what we're really investigating, and this is something I hope we can go into in more depth, is can we take aspects of that shared ledger tokenization thesis and use it to upgrade the world of balance sheets? Because do we want to get rid of the thousands of risk-taking balance sheets that power economic growth in the world today? I don't think so. Do we want to eat the entire crypto thesis of non-sovereign currencies, commodity-based money, anonymous transfer, trustlessness, tokenomics, proof of work? We don't, but there are some elements of that blockchain tokenization thesis that could be incorporated to upgrade the world of balance sheets.
Thank you, Miguel. And I'm delighted to be here. And I have to say, with these two experts on the stage, I always feel like it makes my job a lot easier. I'd also like to say thank you to Cecilia and to BIS for the invitation here. I'm honored to be here and happy to share the stage and talk about that. And also, kind of more broadly, I think probably just about everybody in this room is a member of the Swift community and knows who Swift is. So thank you for being our customers. We never take that for granted. We always want to work for your business. We always want to provide better services. So thank you to everybody in the room as well. This dichotomy is really interesting, and I think a couple of the analogies that were just talked about in terms of kind of looking for new aircraft and new commercial jets as opposed to the air traffic control system, for example, is a really important distinction. We love the ideas of the unified ledger. We love the idea of moving kind of beyond messaging. We think that there's real drivers for that. Tokenization is a really important part of that. So as the world becomes, looks at new digital assets, new digital currencies, whether it's a CBDC or it's a tokenized commercial bank deposit, there's drivers for change, and there's good reasons to do that. And we think there's multiple ways to do that. The unified ledger, even though it's unified, I think we can all safely say there's probably going to be more than one. There might not be 1,000, but there's going to be more than one, and I think everybody easily agree that's healthy. And that's probably how things are going to play out. Well, when you do that, you still need some way to connect those together, and messaging might be a way to do that. We're agnostic in terms of the technology. There's always, as said before, there's always multiple ways to do things. And what we want to do is to kind of leverage the infrastructure that we have, the things that work really well in financial market infrastructures, in commercial banks, in other market participants, to really help the community figure out, where do we take this? How do we make those right decisions? There's lots of ideas. We need to collaborate through innovation to do that. And we need to work together to figure that out. And Swift loves to be at the table. They love to be involved in these things and love to kind of build on top of the experience that we have in this space.
So may I just go a little bit deeper on your answer? So when you see the financial market infrastructures around the world, there are many things that are very nicely done. So you can see infrastructures in India, you can see the new infrastructures in Brazil. So you can see many different infrastructures that are doing a pretty nice job in terms of providing the functionalities necessary for the digital economy. Can you touch a little bit in which of those aspects of existing financial market infrastructures would you consider relevant taking forward? Like some specific examples, and this could be either from the technology side or more like deeper elements, like who keeps the ledgers and how we build this trust behind that.
Yeah, certainly. And SWIFT today connects approximately 240 market infrastructures in virtually every country in the world, right? It's a very important part of the ecosystem that we have. I've worked in market infrastructures prior to joining SWIFT. That's how I got to SWIFT, actually, is the work that I did at the London Clearing House, but also at CLS as well. And so the financial market infrastructures are very mature, right? And they're primarily there to reduce risk, right? And whether it's the functional risk like a central counterparty, or it's PVP risk in foreign exchange, for example, which has been my experience, they're there to reduce risk. So kind of putting the technology aside, they're really risk reducing, for the products, but then also for the ecosystem, right? They also have operational expertise inside of the market infrastructures that's been built up over years and with practice and with modifications, right? So I know, and I've seen, in my experience, in my career, people in financial market infrastructures, some of them are paid all day to think about what could go wrong, right? And there's years and years and decades of experience in that. That's something we need to leverage and build on top of. As the world changes, how do you leverage that foundation of knowledge and expertise across all these interconnected market infrastructures to make that work? And then the third thing I would say is really kind of the rule books and the legal basis for this. And there was some discussion about that yesterday in terms of settlement, and settlement being a legal construct, not a technical construct. And when you say, I settled on a ledger between tokenized assets, like what does that actually mean with settlement finality derivative, right? And so these are not insurmountable problems. We'll figure that out. But these are the core things that we have in market infrastructure today that I think we need to bring forward with us.
What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I mean, what is an FMI? An FMI is a venue with a rule book that's regulated, and again, irrespective of the technology employed, whatever happens in that FMI, there's an event which triggers finality of settlement, that a transaction is done. So again, we have to separate a few claims. In the blockchain community, they talk about atomic settlement as if a piece of technology can achieve settlement, and it cannot. A piece of technology can evidence settlement, but it's only really settled within a legal framework. So I completely support that idea of there being FMIs, but in terms of your question about where we are today and what goes forward, what we can learn perhaps from blockchains like Ethereum is that in the Ethereum network, they've achieved a level of abstraction in terms of what can be represented in a network. So we live today in a world of silos where, for example, a national RTGS system, it only knows one type of asset, central bank money in one currency. And we have CSDs that only know particular types of asset. But in a network like Ethereum, they say, well, a token can represent money, or a token can represent a security, or an equity, or part of your house, or a CryptoKitty, or an NFT. So what that is a lesson in abstraction. And the whole history of computing is abstraction. We start off with having calculators with 4 buttons, and then we end up with general purpose computers. So I think that one of the things that blockchain teaches us is that we can build FMIs in the future that are multi-asset. So let's imagine, but what you don't throw away, you can't just achieve that on a technology. That technology, that shared ledger, that multi-asset ledger, lives in an FMI. And that FMI says anything that takes place with these token movements in the FMI shared ledger has legal significance. So wouldn't it be great if we could build a less siloed financial system and have multi-asset settlement venues? Because, and let me just make this other abstract point, which financial transaction is not really about the movement of assets and liabilities from one balance sheet to another? So there is a potential future where we have multi-asset FMIs where participants can transfer assets and liabilities from one balance sheet to another in a much more coordinated way than we do today.
And you just jumped into the next segment in terms of, okay, so we have this good infrastructures, we have these trust structures, but what is next? What are the next functionalities that we need to put in because society actually requires, no? So when we see the settlement of a DBP or when we see the settlement of a PBP, it's really sad to see how slow this is. And when you see the technologies, even the most basic technology could allow you for immediate settlement if you have the correct trusted institution modifying the ledgers at the same time. But can you go a little bit more into the detail on what you think, Tom, we could put into these existing infrastructures in order to get these new functionalities going?
Yeah, so I think it's important to start with the drivers, right? Whether that's the creation of new digital assets, with either they're native assets or tokenized assets, and what's happening, consumer expectations, right? Business expectations in terms of how quickly the money needs to be there and how safe it is. So, and the general manager said this yesterday. I think it's important that we do it in steps. So we can't skip past making things better today because of the promise of the future, right? And we've done lots of work in obviously with GPI for tracking. We've done lots of work with pre-validation, to try to make sure that we remove the friction. We're doing lots of work around the detection of fraud and things that are anomalous in terms of the flow. So the G20's put out targets around speed and accessibility and cost. Those all need to be pursued with a priority. And as we build on top of that, I always like to say we like to build those with strategic intent because they help today, but they also become kind of the building blocks in terms of what we need to do going forward. We have done a couple of really interesting things I'd like to highlight, and for people who haven't seen it, I wish I could flash the QR code up, but we recently published a report titled the CBDC Sandbox Phase 2. We had 38 central banks, commercial banks, a couple market infrastructures participate in real interoperability, which is where we anchored our work. Because we think interoperability, and to your point, how can we actually remove the friction that we have from the system today is going to be anchored on interoperability and doing that seamlessly, knowing that we're not going to have a big bang moment, right? We're not just going to kind of flip the switch on a Saturday and I'll come in on a Monday into this shiny new tokenized world. Well, interoperability needs to be able to tie back, and it needs to include everybody. In the 38 participants we had in the sandbox experiment, they were banks and market infrastructures, but they were large and small banks, right? So it's not just about a handful of big banks getting together saying, how do we get together and make this work? So we need to remove the friction. We need to not lose sight on what's happening today. We need to make sure that the work that we're doing includes everybody, that it's accessible, that it's based on standards, because standards brings scale. And anything that we can do to kind of move beyond really the consequence of messaging or having different ledgers and everybody having their own set of books is reconciliation, right? And there's some tremendous progress that can be made on things like reconciliation and taking out that type of friction.
Yeah, I'd just like to expand on that. I mean, I think it's to give people an intuition of where we are now and where we might be. I have a very ridiculous example, which is if you're trying to organize a dinner party with 10 people and you can do it by email or by WhatsApp, which is easier?
WhatsApp.
But why?
Because you can reach everyone, no?
Well, you can reach everyone, but the other thing that's different is in the messaging group, everyone who participates knows the exact status of the arrangements. And you don't have 5 people turning up with tiramisu. Right? Because, well, I like tiramisu as well. But the fact there's something, the connection between that is, people say that what we've got just now is slow. Swift messages move at the speed of light. I don't think blockchains move faster than the speed of light. So it's not the fact that it's slow. It's the fact that the participants in the financial transactions don't have a shared idea of state. Yeah. That's what a blockchain or a shared ledger provides you, because it is a state machine. And the thing that we're missing, we have in the financial system of these 20,000 ledgers, we have abstracted out the messaging. The messaging layer is secure, standard, speed of light. But what we don't have is the state machine, and it's perplexing. I mean, everyone laughs at the idea of organizing the dinner party by email. Every financial transaction on the planet today is managed by email.
Yeah. Let me push back just a second here, because you mentioned blockchains as a state machine, but you actually just need cryptography to provide a proper state machine. Because so for the dinner example, it is great that everyone knows that I want tiramisu. But if I want to send money to one particular entity, I might not want everyone to know what I'm ordering, right? And if you have trusted entities, you can get exactly the same finality result if you trust this entity without actually having to go and do a complete blockchain solution. You can just have a properly cryptographically secure database and just provide finality based on that. So what are your thoughts on that?
My thought on that is that the tokenization thesis is different if you're a crypto maximalist or if you work in the regulated financial system. And the tokenization, lots of the things in blockchain are built to overcome institutions or to provide an alternative to central banks and regulated financial services. It's the antithesis. So we're not trying to build a trustless system, an anonymous system, a system of non-sovereign currencies. So we need to extract from the blockchain thesis what's of value to us. And what's of value to us potentially is to the extent to which blockchain is a who owns what machine. That's what it is. It's a who owns what machine. And in our world, we want a who owes what machine, because all of our financial instruments are claims. We want to keep track of who owes what. And that is, if not exactly what blockchain does, there are things in blockchain that inspire us to build that abstract layer, who owns what, who owes what, and having that state machine where everyone knows exactly who's bringing the tiramisu.
I'd love to build on top of that.
Yeah, and if you can link that with the network externalities, Tom, that'd be great, because at some point we have these trusted financial institutions that allow us to know exactly what the status of a particular transaction is. And if we have this type of intermediation, we also have more or less the same result. But I would love to hear your position.
Yeah, just a point of clarification as well on the speed. We measure the time to message. We measure everything, right? But the time to messages to the recipient banks, and over 90% of messages are at the recipient bank within an hour, right? So whether that's fast enough or not, is kind of subjective in some ways. But also where we do have delays on the other side are really around things like operating hours, in a particular country or corridor. I love Maha's project about compliance, right? Because those compliance and in-country checks are actually a large source of delays for ultimately crediting the beneficiary account. So there's a lot of things that we can do with technology to kind of take that friction out. But in terms of the state machine, there are going to be multiple ways of doing that. And I think this is a really interesting place to explore. I don't know how many people would have picked it up last year, but we launched a transaction manager, which is kind of next generation beyond messaging, to move into orchestrated transactions, right? So the creator of a digital asset network we can say to you via APIs, how can we help you orchestrate this, and how can we actually monitor end to end? Because that's what we want. And how do we make sure that in the introduction of that asset, that you work at a kind of a minimal level of service that our Swift community expects on a transaction that goes over Swift. So we now have the capabilities, and we're now directing traffic in some cases as a part of the ISO 2022 migration that's happening now across the industry. We have the ability to orchestrate. And so we can sit with these creator of new digital assets and say, what can we do to help you with our network reach, with our secure messaging? Every message that goes across the Swift network is signed. That can't be taken for granted. And that's one of the reasons we have so much trust and security in the system. So the state machine, one is we've kind of went down that path to say, look, we can have an alternative for that as well. And we'll work with our banks and the community and the creator of digital assets. But also, I think there's a really interesting idea on the state machine, like what do we need to synchronize, right? So if we have multiple settlement venues, which I think everybody's going to think is likely, what could we do to keep the state and synchronize the state between two different settlement utilities, for example? Or could we build services that says, look, between these two settlement utilities, we're going to keep balances, right? One place, remove the reconciliation, and be able to create the balances that are open to the community to be able to check their balances in real time, right? So one of the things we think is really interesting is, how do we innovate this, and how do we take these steps that really eliminate some of the biggest friction points that we have and add these efficiencies without kind of tearing the whole place up? And there's some really, really good opportunities, I think, related to state and related about other things that we might be able to do in the middle. And some ideas we've been working through with our banks and our community that we'd like to see through further.
I'd just like to also delineate this. I mean, often people say to me, well, if we have this new blockchain or this new shared ledger, then you don't need Swift anymore. And I think that's actually misunderstanding what the blockchain or the shared ledger is good for. Because the blockchain or the shared ledger or the DLT or the tokens, they are, again, it's a who owns what machine. It's a bean counting network. If we all entered the room in the morning with 3 beads, I see your beads. If we had 3 beads, if one of the beads represents money and another one represents treasuries and another one represents equities, and we all transfer them between each other during the day, and we empty our pockets at the end of the day and saw who owned what a blockchain can do is keep track of the beads as they move from one pocket to another. So it's a bean counting network. Now, blockchains are not good for massive data payloads. So for example, if I'm a corporation and I receive from you 1,000 invoices, and I'm sending you one payment to settle those 1,000 invoices, you need 1,000 lines of invoice data in order to reconcile your ERP. Do you want to put 1,000 lines of invoice data in a blockchain? I don't think so. So I really see this thing as being a yin and a yang. You have Swift does messaging with a large data payload in the ISO 20022 messages, but it doesn't do settlement. So the ultimate would be to bring these things together where you have messaging and settlement coming together, that who owns what machine working hand in hand with something you can transfer the large data payloads.
So a question here is whether we need to know who wants tiramisu for every transaction, or we need to know who wants tiramisu for some specific economic transactions. So think about DBP, and it makes a lot of sense to have this cryptographic description so that you can basically settle both transactions at the same time, potentially using a shared ledger. So that is okay. And the ledger that might be operated by a commonly trusted entity, or by a consensus, or whatever you want to think about that underlying ledger. But for most of the traditional transactions, that's a bit of an overkill. So if I want to pay for my coffee at the coffee shop, do we really need to put that in a blockchain? Do we really need to do this openly? Or can we just use traditional infrastructures and do a very fast transfer of resources from one account to the other without actually having track whether I have purchased 20 coffees or not, and just modifying the balances that are mine? So my bids, I know exactly how many bids I have, but do I really need to keep track of how the bids have been moving from one place to the other for these very basic transactions?
I would say that our mental models of payment systems are very much defined by the way that the rails work today. And so the kind of verbs that we use are pay and receive. But those models of payments don't meet the needs of new business models. I'll give you one very simple example, which is a food delivery platform. Now, a food delivery platform, you order, let's say, 100 euros worth of, I don't know, Mexican food, I presumably would be what your preferred order. So how does that work for the platform? So the platform takes 100 euros from you, but they only want their commission. They only want 15 euros. And they give 5 euros to the delivery person and 80 euros to the restaurant. So why is it that the payment systems force those interactions to be bidirectional? Now, a consequence of that in Europe is that if you're handling those third-party funds, you have to be a licensed payment institution. And those platforms don't want to be payment institutions. So instead of this idea of bi-directional send and receive the money, why can't the 100 euros just be debited from your account or your token balance? 15 appears in the platform, 5 appears with the rider, and the rest appears at the restaurant without all the money coming through the platform. And then maybe that means the platform doesn't have to be a licensed payment institution. So my point there is, when we get into this topic of programmable payments, there's a lot more we can do to move beyond the mental models we have today of send and receive. We could think of even this idea of sending you money. It's a terrible image because it means that you think I'm sending you something I'm not. It's a transfer of liabilities between two balance sheets. Maybe we can start thinking about teleporting money rather than sending money. And maybe it's about orchestrating debits and credits across multiple values rather than just I send you money and you send that person money. We can move beyond the current paradigm of value transfer. And I think that's an interesting part of the tokenization thesis.
That might be a great segue into AI. You know,
Could
talking
be.
about teleporting.
But why don't you share with us what you're doing in terms of AI and financial market infrastructure? So how you're putting in this new thing coming in.
Yeah, with the title of this series, it might be remiss not to touch on it because lots of talk about networks and digital assets and that sort of thing. But I'm kind of in the camp now where I just feel like AI is going to change everything, and I'm not in the doomsday camp. It's not, the robots aren't going to take over the humans and all that. I don't see that. We can't even get a Zoom call to work every time, right? So I think we're safe for a while. But I think it is going to change everything. And kind of just directly following up on your thought, the whole consumer experience is going to change. And like with all breakthrough technologies, people are going to do really, really creative things with it and going to do really, really evil things with it, right? So the creative things is like you're not going to know, how it was paid for. I saw a demo. I've spent in the last, particularly this year, but in last year, I spent a lot of time on the West Coast of California, Silicon Valley, big techs, fintechs, NVIDIA, everybody, right? And this is kind of where I'm coming to my conclusion that it's going to change everything. I saw a demo where a lady is watching a YouTube video, and she says, "I like that black and white sweater." She's literally watching a sweater, and her prompt is her voice, right? And boom, boom, boom. Do you want to use your credit card on file? It's on the way to your house. The whole consumer experience, this is not like happening tomorrow, let's take a look and let's think about it. It's happening today. It's already happening. Now, if you stay with the voice example, when I call my bank, which I won't name, in the US, and hopefully I never have to call them too much, But if I do have to call them, the first thing they say is, your voice is your password. And we're being live streamed right now. So with 30 seconds of my answer, my voice can be perfectly copied and potentially log into my bank account. I'm sure there's other safeguards, but that could happen, right? So like with all breakthrough technologies, we're working with a group of 10 banks that we've kicked off to look for anomalies, including fraud, using AI, starting with the SWIFT data to train the model, and then to supplement that with data that comes from our banks and even data about frauds that didn't happen or wouldn't happen in cross-border wire payments, in institutional fraud, other forms of fraud. And so we have 10 banks that are coming together collectively saying, look, together we can build a better model and solution than any one bank can do, even the most sophisticated banks. So we're doing that work now, and you'll see some communications coming out on that shortly. But AI can be used for fraud and to remove friction. I also think in terms of generative AI, and some of the people in this room are exploring that, and if you want to talk to me after the session, I'm happy to talk to you about this and kind of share some thoughts. But just taking the inputs that you get from banks as a supervisor and finding insights in unstructured data, for example, that exists today. There's central banks that are using that today to find risk insights, to find insights on their traffic, right? And so all of these things are available today, and they're all going to get a lot better. I mean, we definitely are kind of version 1.0. They're all going to get a lot better. These generative AI models, we know them because you use ChatGPT or use Copilot, and those are super helpful, and they're all text-based. You put in text, they give you better text back, write poems, write songs, content creation, all that sort of thing. But you could also put anything you want into it, video, audio, and get anything you want out of it. Video, audio, text, grammatically perfect paragraphs, right? So it's all changing, and there's a tremendous amount of opportunities to find insights to do much more clever things in the data that you already have today and do your jobs better. So I don't think it's really optional at this point.
Final quick question to make this consistent with an innovation fora. So in 20 years, and I think I more or less know what you're going to answer, but what do you think the role of FMIs will be in 20 years' time? And if you had to choose, should it be enhance the old or enable the new?
I think people will still be reading the PFMIs to their children in 20 years' time. Everyone does that in this room, right? PFMIs is a great read. It's one of my favorites. It's really stood the test of time, and it will stand the test of time going forward, I think. So I would hope to think that we would achieve that abstraction and have multi-asset FMIs. I hate to question the cult of user centricity, but just for a second, try on the hat of balance sheet centricity and just see the world as made up of balance sheets. Central bank balance sheet, commercial bank balance sheet, non-bank financial balance sheets. We're all individual balance sheets. Every financial transaction is the movement of assets and liabilities from one balance sheet to another. And they need to be coordinated. We need to keep track of who owes what to whom. And so I think there's a real chance of building more multi-asset infrastructures. Just a venue. Agora is a venue. It's a place where you can come with your balance sheet and you can represent some aspect of your balance sheet and transfer that to somebody else. And within the FMI, that has legal significance. So to borrow Andrea's point, I think the financial system is a half-finished thought. And there's a lot of opportunities to improve the way in which we coordinate and synchronize this world of balance sheets. Users are important as well, but so are balance sheets.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, unless we're going to kind of rethink, the principles and the definition of settlement, you're going to have those constructs in place, whether it's 5 or 10 or 20 years. I think the real difference is, I agree, I think we're going to get a lot of efficiencies out of multi-asset. I think that's going to be driven by the creation of the assets, driven by market demand. So it's not just going to be kind of people thinking about new cool things to do. There's going to be real real drivers for that. I think the experience on every level is going to be completely transformed by AI, whether that's your customer service response, whether that's you finding insights, from the banks that you oversee and regulate, whether we can actually use that to not only detect a potentially fraudulent payment, but actually build discovery services, right? So the yellow light goes on and says, this corridor, this country, this type of activity is problematic. Somebody needs to take a look at it and follow up, right? There's always going to be a human there to follow up. So, this is not about running more efficiently. This is about just doing things in a lot more automated way and having just far superior tools to do your jobs and to do their jobs better. But I think in what we're being asked to do, you still need legal structure, you still need operational expertise, you still need people who spend their day figuring out how to take risk out of the system and making it more scalable and resilient. And we have to do that across the board. That's not just for the big players. That's not just for the money center banks. It's for everybody. And a more inclusive economy, a better connected economy, a more automated ecosystem is good for everybody.
Thank you. So I just summarize this with ledgers, trust, and institutions helping us build these trust networks that are necessary for finality in settlements. And we consumed all the time. I'm sorry that we did not allow for more time, but you will have these gentlemen during the coffee break to pick their brains. Help me with giving applause. Thank you.